Let's go. Welcome to the Carl Jackson Podcast. We are in Southern California, San Diego. We have a great show for you today. It's going to be a doozy, so I'm going to warn you now. Paul Crouch Jr. is my guest. Welcome to the Carl Jackson Podcast. I'm excited and delighted that you guys are with us today on CJC Network.
Cut.
Yes, sir.
Take two. Sorry, that's my director coming out.
He's already coming out, man. I love it, man. We are in over 100 million homes that are able to watch the network, so we just want to say thank you guys for watching us on all our television platforms that we are on. We have a special guest with us today. We've had him here before, but this time he has allowed us to do an in-person interview, and this is like a dream come true for me because him and his family have been a significant part of really television, not just Christian television. So would you welcome with me Mr. Paul Crouch Jr.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Honored to be here.
Yes.
Bless you, my friend.
Yes, sir. Man, we have so much to talk about because the last time you and I had this conversation, or had a conversation, was through Zoom.
Correct.
And so it was awkward. Zoom in itself is awkward anyway, because you know you're having this conversation. You want to make it feel personal, but it's really not personable.
Right.
And so it was a lot of things that I wanted to talk to you about that I just felt like was just awkward. You know what I mean?
Understood.
It's just you didn't know me well enough to really dive in. But now we have some form of a relationship, and I'm just thankful that you allowed me to do that first one, but also trusted me with that. So what you been up to, man? How you been doing?
Well, I'm doing great. I mean, literally what's interesting, I started in television before you were even born. TVN started in 73.
Right.
And I grew up even before that. My father was in the Assemblies of God film division. And they used to do missionary films. You know what film is.
Yeah.
Many of your viewers
16, 35 millimeters, 70 millimeters.
may not even know what film is.
Right.
Something you hold up, you actually see pictures
Exactly.
on it. But so the technology has changed. In 73, a camera was the size of this table. A VTR
True.
was the size of that wall that would record for 1 hour. A camera was $100,000. A VTR was $250,000 in the 70s. So it really is almost mind-blowing to know, where this technology has gone. There's a scripture I want to read for you in a little bit about the cloud, and I'll give that to you later. But, for me, technology has always been about, and my father was one scripture, Mark 16:15. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. So how do we use this and that and this to do that?
Right.
Whether the camera's the size of this wall or this, we still have to make content that will touch and affect people's lives.
Right.
And that's what I think, I want to bring to the table. If you go back into the 30s, the church preached against radio. Mm-hmm. They thought radio was evil. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, don't go on radio. You go into the film industry. My dad could not go see a movie in a movie theater.
I couldn't either.
Yeah, exactly. You'd go to hell, brother.
Yeah, you're going to hell.
And but what's sad is if Christians aren't going to use these tools, the devil will use them.
Oh yeah.
They will use technology, movies, films, radio, television, the internet to affect your kids, my kids, into the ways of the world or things that we don't necessarily agree with as Christians. Right. So I said, and my father was a pioneer in this. We are going to use every technology possible, the internet, film, movies, TV, radio, shortwave, whatever we can do to preach the gospel. That's what we're going to do.
Wow. So you still pretty much doing that, right?
I am. Yeah. I had several stints at TBN. I was there in the early years from 73 to 83. Those were the pioneering era. But in the 80s, 90s, and 90s, I had my own production company. Mm-hmm. Now, Brandon, who is, you'll talk to later, my son, was just a little kid. But I traveled with Billy Graham. I traveled with Bill Bright. I used to direct a show called Hour of Power with Robert Schuller.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the era. Now I worked with TBN. I just didn't work for TBN. And then in 2000, I went back full time, and I was there. My father was getting older. They were struggling with getting into this new technology called the internet.
Right.
You know, my dad, his era was broadcasting and satellite. You know, broadcasting meaning his era was transmitting a TV signal from a mountain, and you get rabbit ears on your TV set. Again, many of your viewers don't even know what that is.
Right.
VHF, UHF, and you used to get TV wirelessly, believe it or not.
Right.
So my dad understood broadcasting, he understood satellite, he did not understand the internet. As that started to emerge, I brought TBN into a new era of video on demand, internet streaming, and what finally got my father connected with the internet, and this was a great story. He and I had traveled in 2003 or 4 to China. China had invited my father, and they wanted to get Christian television into China. And they were fascinated with this Jesus person. Who is he? Now, a lot of people in the Chinese government thought Jesus was a fairy tale, you know, like King Arthur. They had no clue that this was a history book. But when Dad started explaining that Christ was real, he was pro-government, pay unto Caesar, that is Caesar's. You know, the Chinese were absolutely clueless when it came to Christianity. Absolutely. They are raised really agnostic. So they were fascinated with TBN, and they invited us over. We met with the vice premier, which would be like meeting our vice president here in America. We had dinner at the Hall of the People, which would have been like the White House. So we were being wined and dined all over the country. But I took my dad into a little, what they called in those days, internet cafes. And all of a sudden, I went into an internet cafe, and you could send emails back and forth. I went in, we rented a computer, I went to TBN's website, and it took, 3 minutes to download to finally get the whole thing. But I said, look, Dad, here's TBN in communist China. I clicked on our streaming. At that time, it was a thing called Real Media. I don't know if you remember Real Media. It was really one of the first video players before QuickTime, before...
Oh, yeah.
You remember them?
I do remember, yeah.
They were like...
They were before Windows, actually.
Exactly
right.
right.
Around the same time, almost.
Exactly right. You know, they were... Sometimes the first one in isn't the winner, And they were one of the first ones doing video on the internet. Clicked on TBN, and within about a minute, a box about that big, and it was probably 16 pixels by 16 pixels. It was like watching a postage stamp. But we were watching TBN in communist China. And they couldn't keep it out. They weren't blocking it or anything. And I said, Dad, this is the future. And I said, the internet is going to get into parts of the world like North Korea, like Iran, Iraq. I said, they'll get into parts of the world where you would be killed or murdered if we tried to share the gospel in person. And he finally, I saw it in his face. He sat down and he said, Paul, you're right. And so that's when we really, in the 2000s, started investing money into the internet, building servers, building video on demand. And that was kind of my contribution to TBN in the early days. So
you guys were actually pioneers, because you go from your dad doing the Holy Beamer with the 18-wheeler, which is what ABC, NBC, CBS use to film games and go live at a location. Your dad was the one that came up with the concept of an 18-wheeler.
That's correct.
Basically being its own control room. And then you come right along before Netflix and start the whole on-demand thing, before it was even a Netflix.
That's correct. No, we were true pioneers in those two areas. And satellite, the concept of being able to have one signal hit a satellite that orbited the Earth, cover the whole United States with one signal, was literally mind-blowing. And let me read this scripture for you real quick, because I think you'll find it fascinating. So, like I said, my father was a true pioneer, not only in broadcasting, which was building TV stations, meaning you built one in LA,
Right.
then you went to Phoenix,
Right.
then you went to Oklahoma City, then when you went to Dallas. You built a city at a time.
What they call broadcast today.
Right.
They call it broadcast.
It's almost like franchising,
Right.
you know, but you had to have a transmitter, you had to have a tower or a mountain, you had to have a studio
Very expensive.
in every city,
Right.
and that would reach just that city.
Right.
So satellite was reaching all 350 or 80 million people in one swoop back in the day. So there is a satellite, and that, what's interesting, orbits in what we call geosynchronous orbit, which is 26,000 miles up in, it's not in space, and I'll tell you why that's important, and it's not in our atmosphere. It's in what we call mid-space.
Okay.
And it orbits, a signal would hit that and rain down all over the United States. Now take a look at that. If you were John the Revelator and you'd never seen a satellite before, you see that in a vision. RCA named this bird Angel 1.
Oh, wow.
We didn't name it that.
Wow.
They named it Angel 1.
Wow.
Okay, so keep that in the back of your brain for a second. Let me take you to Revelation. And my dad quoted this many, many times. Revelation 14:6. And this is from John the Revelator. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven. Not in the atmosphere, not in space. This angel was flying in the mid-heavens. In fact, the King James says mid-heavens. Having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth. To every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God, give him glory. For the hour of his judgment is come. And worship him who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water. And for 14 years, that angel orbited, preaching the gospel. Fear God, give him glory. And what was interesting about that satellite, Trinity Broadcasting, obviously Trinity means three. TBN was the third customer on that satellite.
Wow.
HBO, Cinemax, TBN.
Wow.
So that was his era. That was his, really, and God had given him a vision of satellite.
Right.
So he knew he was going in the right direction because God really directed him as a pioneer in satellite. Okay, we're sitting here, 40 years later, you know, satellite's still around. It's a dying technology.
Right.
25 years ago, if I would have said to you, what is a cloud? Well, a cloud is a white, puffy thing in the sky.
Right.
You know, clouds are where rain comes. And what is the cloud today? The sum total of every piece of data that you're creating, that every network is creating, every phone call, every time I surf the web, every time I go to my computer, every time I watch TV, that's going through the cloud, which is in essence like the internet.
Right.
Okay, let's go down to Revelation 14:14. Just a few scriptures down. We see satellite in 14:6. Look at 14:14. And think of this with the cloud now being the internet. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man. Not a cloud, he sat on the cloud.
The cloud, right.
Having his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. So he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped.
Wow.
And I am absolutely convinced that, again, a lot of scripture has double meaning, double entendre.
Absolutely.
John, did he see an angel or did he see that satellite?
Right.
Now, if you don't believe in God, I mean, you're sitting there going, these
What
guys
are they
are
talking about?
Looney Tunes.
Right.
You know, but if you really have a faith background, I really believe the cloud is how we are going to use this technology that you're pioneering, we're all pioneering, to reach the last generation. It's up to us as Christians to use these tools to create good material, good content, good shows that will go into the cloud.
Right.
People will watch it. Listen, the world is carrying a TV set on their hip right now. Even in third world countries. You know, there's more cell phones in Africa than America. And if we will create good content, people will watch. You know that. You're creating your own lane.
Absolutely.
And I believe we are going to use this to reach people for the gospel. And this will be the final harvest, in my opinion.
Now, when you say final harvest, do you think there's a timeline in this? Because, you know, it took us 40 years to get here.
Right.
So what do you think? I mean, I know you can't estimate per se, but what do you think that the timeline is going to be?
Well, that's a great question, and I would literally just fall back to no man knows the day or the hour. Because I was raised in a rapture generation. You know, listen, there was a book. I got married in 1980. I was born in 60. So there was a book out, 88 Reasons We're Going to Be Raptured in 88. So I was absolutely convinced we're out of here in 88.
Right.
So, you know, and that motivated so many people in my generation that you don't have to plan for retirement. Right. You don't have to do this. Right. We're all getting a get out of jail free card in 88.
Right.
So, you know, whatever. And so it's, it really, I think, harmed a lot of Christians that they just became, you know, warehoused in their church, the four walls of their church. And I think it's hurt our culture today. I think we were talking about this with another show I was on. I think Christians need to be in the world, they're just not of the world. And if Christians were more involved in city council, in politics, in your school boards, look at all the garbage that's being shoved down our kids' throats with non-genderism and non-binary and this and that.
Disney just came out with their thing that they're getting ready to...
If Christians would be on every city council, every school board, a lot of this garbage would never come up to vote.
Absolutely.
So I think a generation has just sat at the altar of their church saying, Lord, just zap us out of here because we're going to heaven anyway. And I think that's been very damaging. Very damaging to my generation and even your generation. So I don't know when the Lord's coming. I don't care. I just know I'm going to tarry till he comes. And I'm gonna go down fighting, brother. I'm gonna be swinging, doing as many shows, as many things as I can do before he returns.
You have a studio not far from here. What do you do mainly at your studios here?
We have if you go to our website, just pjvideo.com.
It's on the screen, by the way.
Okay, thank you. There's an Anaheim studio that I'm partnered with. It's one I've built for TBN, probably 60. Not just TBN, I built studios for other Christian networks. I built studios for churches, and everybody's building a studio now.
Everybody.
In fact, churches are turning into production companies.
Absolutely.
As you know, they have to. Mariners Church, which is, 5 minutes from here, is one of the biggest churches here in Orange County. They've turned into a stinking production company, and a TV station. COVID changed everything.
It did.
As you know. So during COVID, it's one of the most beautiful studios. It's on the 7th floor of a high-rise building in Anaheim. So, and it has windows in 180 degrees. So we're looking out on Anaheim. We're looking out on Disneyland. We're looking out on some churches, out on trees. So when you look out the windows, it's not a translight. It's not LED screens. You're looking out on Disneyland.
Wow.
And so we're doing talk shows, we're doing music shows, we're doing Skype interview shows, talk in a box shows that we call. And so that's all in Anaheim. But, we also have a small insert stage in Tustin where Brandon and our office is. But most of what we do is like what you're doing here. We go on location, we shoot, we edit. We're trying to bring the best tools and technology to all of the productions that we work on, and that's really our job.
So I have a couple questions. I'm gonna go deep a little bit, guys.
Uh-oh.
So here we go. Well, you know, the last time you were here, we had a lot of emails and phone calls. I even got text messages from pastors who were saying, you know, that was a great interview. I can't believe that you got them to talk. And but I didn't. They was asking me why I didn't ask some of the questions that a lot of people wanted to know, and so I'm just gonna be as delicate as possible. But obviously, it's in the news. Everybody has seen it in papers or whatever.
Sure.
About what happened with the whole TBN dynasty and why you guys pretty much went separate ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think what people want to know, if we could even go into it a little bit, is well, first of all, I want to know personally, what is your relationship like with Matt today? And then obviously, what was that conversation like for you to even decide to resign? Because that's what I read, is that you resigned.
I did resign, and my parents accepted the resignation. My brother had moved in at a very strategic time, and was trying to take over TBN, take over the assets. I mean, it's as clear as
right.
as crystal to me.
Right.
Very obvious.
Right.
If you knew Matt's personality, he and I are just different breed of cat. Totally opposite.
I met Matt one time when I was a kid, and the vibe I got from him was he was really cocky.
Yeah,
he's like a cocky guy.
Well, I've heard that. I've heard narcissist. I've heard,
right.
whatever.
Right.
Now, I love my brother. I have to love my brother.
Absolutely.
I am not my brother's keeper.
Right.
And I think he did some things that he is going to regret. And it's not all of it's come out yet.
Right.
I'm not going to share everything here. I can share pieces.
Right.
And so stay tuned, because you're going to get some interesting tidbits here. But it was a very trying time. And, I've seen that with the Schulers. They had a family split.
The Hillsong documentary.
The Hillsong we just watched.
Right.
Hillsong is dealing with some of the same things that TBN is dealing with.
Right.
What's interesting, I don't want to say birds of a feather, but
right.
They were connected very tight, and they had two very large empires. And here's the lesson for all of us, and I think this is what is going to come out when my book comes out, or my daughter's book, or a documentary. We could do a documentary on TBN that makes Hillsong look like Disneyland.
Wow.
To be honest with you.
Wow.
But there is absolutely a thing that when empires, and I don't think it's just Christian, but when Christian ministries or empires or companies get big, you become a big target. Trust me, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, they say. But there is an absolute thing, and I saw it with my own eyes, of protecting the empire over employees or my own children. Now, what happened, my daughter, if you go to the lawsuit, this is all public information.
Yeah, absolutely.
She was abused and possibly raped by a TBN engineer. She was 13 years old. He was 36. In Atlanta. And Steve Smith is the guy's name. I don't give a hoot.
Right.
Who knows?
Right.
I want people to know. I hope he's in hiding.
Right.
Because honestly, if I ran across the guy, it could get... It would be worse than the Oscar celebration, trust me. So
shout out to Will Smith, by the way. Shout out to you, man. We know why.
So that is the sad part, that
right.
TBN absolutely was trying to save the embarrassment of a lawsuit, save the embarrassment of the PR hit. Listen, when you're running a $200 million a year ministry, you get bad PR, your donations dip.
Go down, right.
Just like a church.
Right.
Dude, the pastor of a church gets caught with a secretary, you don't think the donations are going to go down?
It's over.
It's
right.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's the issue with TBN, is they were trying to save that. There had just before that, about a year before, my father had been accused of sexually harassing an African-American employee. He sued us. That my dad absolutely did pay this guy $250,000 to kind of stay quiet.
Right.
You'd think, we would have learned from Jim Baker.
And Tammy, right.
With Jessica Hahn. My dad paid. Now, in his case, my dad paid that $250,000 out of personal funds, not ministry funds.
Gotcha.
That's what got Jim in trouble.
Right.
So now my mom wasn't happy about it because that was pretty much their life savings at that point.
Wow.
Now, and that's a whole nother story. So what happened to me and why I resigned, and it's a long way about to make a very long story short, I got caught with Sophie's Choice. And if you know that movie,
oh yeah,
she got caught with which child does she put on the train, knowing that one's going to go to, Auschwitz or something, and she would keep the other. Did I love my parents and their ministry? Did I love TBN, or did I love my daughter? And Matt made it very clear that if you're not for me, you're against me. And that is the gospel truth. I will defend that till the day I die. And I chose my daughter. I said, I will resign because I'm going to protect Kara over trying to protect the ministry, the reputation of TBN. Now, the other issue, and Matt moved in what we call the perfect storm, is my father was dealing with some alcoholism issues. He was going on the air, sometimes inebriated, sometimes drunk. And I had confronted my father, and this is, as God is my witness, to save TBN, the embarrassment. I said, Dad, you cannot go on behind the scenes or praise the Lord inebriated. I'm sorry. It's just, no. And my mom was having some issues, a possible affair in Orlando. And
with the guy who played
Jesus. Right. Like, tell me that just doesn't blow your mind.
Blowing.
And I saw with my own eyeballs some security camera footage of my mother, and his name is Les Cheveldayoff, if you want to look the guy up. Wow. I don't know if he's still alive or not.
Right.
And I just knew this was not right.
Right.
And we had just dealt with public information. Benny Hinn and Paula White had gotten caught over in Rome holding hands. Now, Benny Hinn is a married man.
Right.
Paula was not. But you got a married televangelist dating and holding hands with another televangelist in Rome, coming out of a hotel. It just looks terrible.
Right.
And listen, Christians love to not only run you over with the bus, but they'll back up over you. And Benny Hinn was not an employee of TBN. He was airing on TBN. Right. He bought airtime on TBN. He was a friend of TBN. He was a friend of my parents. But everybody thought, oh my God, that's Benny, that's TBN. And so they stopped giving because of what Benny did. So it's like the old throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Wow.
And so we had dealt with that. We had dealt with this LA Times article on my father. When my daughter's molestation came up, my mother blamed Kara. She said it. And that was what came out in that Hillsong. It's called victim shaming.
Victim shaming, right.
They shamed her. It was her fault. She's 13. She should have known better. This was a 36 or 38-year-old man.
Wow.
And then they hid it from me.
Oh.
Now, they may have hid it from me because if they'd have told me, I probably would have flown to Atlanta and killed the guy.
Yeah, you would have killed the guy.
And then I'd be in prison.
Right.
Now, in fairness, that may be part of it. I don't think that's why they kept it from me, but I think they kept it from me to just keep a lid on it.
Right.
Kara,
they wanted to protect the empire.
And protect the empire. Right. And that's what Hillsong, this documentary showed in their thing. That's what TBN did. They were protecting the empire. I resigned. I walked away. And it took me, now listen, when one door closes, the Lord opens up multiple other doors.
Yeah, because you went to the Word Network, but I'm going to ask you before you go there, did you at least get any type of compensation No.
I got 2 weeks.
Are you kidding me?
2 weeks pay and my vacation
This is
pay.
important.
Oh, I
because
know.
People think because it's a family dynasty and the Crouches that just automatically means you walked away with $100 million.
Absolutely not.
And that's just not true.
Absolutely not. You know, my parents weren't wealthy people. Now, they controlled a lot of assets. You know, TBN.
But assets is not cash. I've said this before on my podcast.
That's exactly right. But they controlled a lot of cash too.
Right.
But it was in the realm of the ministry.
So they couldn't really touch it.
That's correct.
Right.
You know, it's like the Pope trying to sell the Sistine Chapel.
Right.
He didn't own it.
Right.
You know, or he can't go sell the crown jewels that
Right.
sit in that museum.
Right.
They're probably worth $1 billion.
Right. But he better not touch it.
Yeah. And that's
Right.
a little bit of what you have to deal with a church or any nonprofit.
Right.
So that's really the bigger issue.
So you walked away with basically faith and just
I did.
believing.
Now I had
Some money
some
stashed.
savings.
Right.
You know, I mean my back pay and all
Right.
this other stuff was $15,000, something
That's
like that.
nothing.
Yeah, and I had no job.
Wow.
I had put my whole life into TBN for the last 12 years. So my freelance business was gone. You know, I had a lot of production people that I worked with. That was all gone.
Wow.
So in 2012, when I left, like you said, the first person I went to, now somebody had prophesied something when I left. And it was very interesting. And I've always said there's people that prophesy,
and
lie, and then those that prophet try. And so I probably fall into the prophet try. But this one guy who I trust like no other prophesied. He said, I see you as like a bumblebee, and I see this huge field of flowers. And he said, these flowers are these new networks that are springing up. And he said, I see you pollinating. Wow. You're flying from one to another, to another, to another, to another. And as you pollinate, more networks spring up, more flowers spring up. So when I left TBN, no, I did not get angry over it. I can't even imagine doing to my son, Brandon, what my father did to me. It was a total cutoff. My brother Matt had lied about me, that I was having affairs, that I was doing this, that I was, kiking money. And he had gone into my email list to try to find evidence of me with all of that. And after about a 2-year investigation, none of it was true. Right. And by then, my father had died. So in the middle of all this mess, my father's health, and I know this whole situation didn't help him. Right. His health crashed. Stress. He died. The board shifted to my mother, to my brother, and an attorney named Colby May. And they spent the next 5 or 7 years literally trying to crucify my daughter, that Kara, who had lobbed a lawsuit against TBN for the molestation. They tried to bury it. They tried to shame her. They tried to dishonor her. They tried to make her look like a horrible person. When you defend a murderer or you defend somebody, you try to make the other side look bad. Right. That's your job as an attorney. Right. They took my daughter, who was 13 at the time, and they put her at, about 15 or 16, through a deposition that when it comes out, people are going to vomit. Oh, I mean, the questions that the board of directors approved, Colby May, at that point it was my mother and Matt, and then Lori was involved in two, my brother's. I was going to ask about Lori. Yeah, my brother's wife. They asked my daughter some of the most disgusting questions about her body parts, about her sexuality, about this and that. And when it comes out, I mean, people are going to literally just roll their eyes and say, this is a bad movie. This cannot be true. A family does not treat family like that. Absolutely. And that's what's been very hard. But God, in His grace, has kept us strong. My business thrived. Brandon and I got reconnected. Started building PJ Video all over again, acquiring equipment, acquiring clients, acquiring jobs. And we're busier than we've ever been with documentaries, with branded shoots for Indian motorcycles.
He shoots for everybody.
He shoots for Hoonigan. He shoots, we're doing commercials and corporate video. And my end always leans more towards the faith side with churches and different faith-based organizations. But he and I together will work on almost anything.
Wow. So let me ask you something, and this is mind-blowing for me. Like, I'm still processing a lot of this.
Because you grew up with TVN.
Yeah, I grew up as a fan of TVN and I used to actually watch, because here's the thing, we couldn't watch secular television.
Right.
So our parents were basically like, look, if you're going to be, I told my mom and dad I was going to be a filmmaker, which is what I do to make a living.
Yeah.
And they said, look, if you're going to do it, you're going to have to learn from this. So I would watch TVN. I would watch you on behind the scenes. I would watch, Matt and the whole family. And so it's very, I'm not surprised now that I'm in this side of the business that things like this happen. But it's just heartbreaking because you want to believe the fairy tale. You want to believe that this family, that Crouch family, royalty, you want to believe that story. And so it's very heartbreaking.
Well, it is. But if you go into the Bible, look at the story of David.
Yes.
Look at the story of Peter, and he was Peter the rock.
Right.
On this church, I'm going to build my church. Right. Or on this rock, I'm going to build this church. But he denied Christ three times. Said, I don't know this guy.
Right.
So we are all fallible. We are all,
absolutely,
failures.
Absolutely.
But God will use imperfect people.
Right.
Let me tell you a quick lesson. My dad told this story many times. If God is using you in any fashion, in any way, he's using you because you are probably the least likely person to be chosen.
That's definitely me.
Exactly. Now, you had good parents, I can tell.
Yeah,
you had a good mom and daddy.
I did.
But, if I was God and I was going to start the world's largest network, the last two people I would have picked was Paul and Jan Crouch.
Right.
They had no money.
Right.
They couldn't sing.
Right.
They were, mom was just kind of a house mom and a good mom. Dad was a businessman. They couldn't preach. Right. They weren't preachers.
Right.
But here's what they were. They were obedient. And when God called them, they said, yes, we will go.
Wow.
And that is what God needs from each and every one of us.
Amen.
Is our obedience.
Right.
Brother T.D. Jakes, who, I love to death, and I think he credits TBN to really the one that brought his ministry to the forefront.
Absolutely.
His broken vessel message of the potter's wheel. God will take a broken vessel, put it on his wheel, and use each and every one of us.
Man, that's powerful. So let me ask you this, and this is a forgiveness question, a healing question. When something like this happens, and there are people right now who are watching that I'm sure have been through family, you'd be surprised how many people going through family issues.
Oh, gosh,
I mean, what you said is probably nothing compared to some of the stuff that people are watching have went through. But let me ask you, how did you heal from, how did you forgive your father? Because you never got to have that moment.
Yeah.
You never got to have, did you have that moment with mom?
I didn't.
So what was that for? How did you process that?
That's a great question. Nobody's asked me that, but my father, the lawsuits were flying back and forth between TBN and Brittany, my older daughter. I won't get into that. My younger daughter was suing TBN for the abuse. Everybody was looking at me. These are your daughters. Get them to drop their lawsuits.
Right.
Dude, I had no control over Kara at that point. The attorneys were involved. And everybody was looking at me as like some intermediary. I was caught between a rock and a hard place. Now, I love my daughter, and when I had to make a choice to take a bullet, I would take a bullet for my daughter.
Absolutely.
before my parents, even though I love my parents.
Absolutely.
But because all that was spinning and everybody wanted the lawsuits to drop, and they were threatening me with lawsuits, and that financially they were going to crush me and all this stuff. My dad died. He got sick and he just passed away. So I never went to his memorial. I never went to his service.
Oh, you didn't even get to go?
No, I was not allowed.
You wasn't allowed
to my own father's memorial. I went to Hoag Hospital, which is 5 minutes down the street here. He wasn't in his deathbed. He actually died at home. But I went to Hoag Hospital to go see him because I knew he had some serious heart issues. In Hoag, because they deal with a lot of celebrities, you have to know a code name.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I went to Hoag. They knew I was a Crouch. They knew I was Paul Crouch Jr.
Right.
The nurse got pale when I went to the desk. She goes, Paul Crouch Sr.'s right there. She knew who my dad was.
Right.
I didn't know the code word. She would not let me in. And she said, I'm so sorry. She said, if I let you in, I would have to call security and they would arrest you and drag you out of here. So that's the garbage and the crap that was going on in that era. I did meet with my mother about a year later. The lawsuits were still flying back and forth. Her basic thing was, PJ, get Kara to drop her lawsuit. We'll all be a family again. We'll all do this. We'll all do that. We hugged. We loved. And because Matt was involved, because my daughter's attorneys didn't trust Matt as far as they could throw him,
right.
They said, no, we're going to go through. Now, that lawsuit took place. Carol won a $2 or $3 million judgment. A jury of 12 people heard the story,
right.
And she won.
Right.
And that was, that's just a fact.
Right.
Within a couple years, then my mother dies. She literally had a major stroke, and Dad was kind of slow. Mom was lights out. Here today, gone tomorrow.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, again, I heard about her having the stroke. It got weird. My cousin, who is an attorney, called me. If you want to see your mother, you've got to do this. You've got to fly there. You've got to do this. And by the time it all worked out, she was gone. And so I never saw either one of them. But again, there is an element of forgiveness. Mm-hmm. I do forgive. I have to forgive.
How did you do it?
To be honest with you, I saw the grace of God. I saw the fact that I've never seen the righteous forsaken. I mean, literally, I had fear when I left TBN. I was going to be homeless, living in my car. With no money, no this. I have kids. And all of a sudden I saw God swoop me up and give me work and a job and a business and a career and more opportunity now than I did when I was at TBN.
Wow. And
I said, listen, God is with me. And if he's with me, I'm gonna go down swinging.
Right.
And so because he is with me, I have forgiven my brother. I have forgiven, my parents in my heart. I think the Bible says there's going to be a lot of tears in heaven. And when I see my folks, it's going to get weepy.
I think when you're talking, I'm thinking about Eric Clapton's song.
Right. Yes.
That's so powerful.
Yeah. Oh, my tears in heaven.
Yeah.
So, but I the fact that I have a loving son, my 2 daughters,
beautiful.
I have grandkids, I have a beautiful wife. I have so much to be thankful for.
Right.
I have great ministry opportunities, great contacts, and I'm just going for it.
If you had to give me, let's say me, if you were talking to me as I go down this journey that's similar to your parents, I'm at the beginning of it, what lesson would you tell me you learned watching it outside looking in?
It's a good question too. I would just say, don't focus on yourself. My parents were never in TV to get likes, to get clicks, to get followers. Right. They literally were focused on, like I said, Mark 16:15.
Right.
Now you're using yours for education and
Right.
ministry, and I applaud all of that.
Right.
My dad literally used television like a big bullhorn.
Oh, okay.
You know, he just sitting on the street corner. You know, John C. 3:16. If we honestly, we teased him one time. Said, "Dad, we're spending millions of dollars on studios and lights and cameras and all this stuff. Why don't we just do a credit roll of John 3:16?
Right.
Yeah, just roll it 24/7.
Right.
And you know, people would get saved.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know, be cheap.
Right.
You know, so I mean, that was a little tongue in cheek.
Well, today it's called a lyric video.
Right.
You know, that's what it's a lyric video. They're popular.
Exactly right. So, but just stay focused on others. Stay focused. I have traveled the world. I have seen the effects Christian television had on people's lives, your life. Mm-hmm. I literally, to this day, 3 days ago, a guy runs up to me. He looks like he's going to kill me. He's a gang member. He's got like a Mexican dude, shaved head. He had a big pentagram on his head. He had that, what are those little teardrop things?
Right.
He runs up to me. He hugs me. He said, "Brother, thank you."
Wow.
He said, "I was in prison."
Oh, wow.
He said, I'd gone down, he thought, for 30, 40 years for something. And he said, "I got saved watching TBN."
Oh, wow.
In prison. You were in prison and you visited me.
Wow.
And he literally had tears in his eyes. And my wife's standing next to me. And this Mexican guy's hugging me like my father.
Right.
And he said, "Thank you." And now he's a pastor of a church. He showed me his family and his kids. And he had 3 of the cutest little kids. And I just said, man. The gospel is powerful. It can affect and change people's lives.
Right.
And I've seen people that had, and talked to people that had guns to their head, you know, that they were going to commit suicide. Raul Reese, I don't know if you know that story. He's a pastor here in Golden Springs, up in Brea.
Absolutely.
Literally, he was Vietnam vet, total PSD or PTSD. He was going nuts. He was convinced his wife was having an affair. He went and got his gun out of his closet. When his wife came home that night, she was a little church girl, he was going to shoot her and kill her.
Oh, wow.
He's sitting there. His mind is just being eaten up by the devil, by PTSD. He didn't know what to do. He takes the butt of that gun, smashes it into the TV set to try to break it. All of a sudden, that TV set comes on. And there is TBN. And there is Chuck Smith on TBN saying, "Somebody loves you. Somebody died for you. Somebody wants to heal you." And literally, Raul Reese fell to his knees in front of his TV set and gave his heart to the Lord. Wow. And when, about an hour later, his wife comes home, he opens the door, and he said, "Honey, you're never going to believe what happened." Wow. And he told her that story, that he was going to shoot her when she walked in the door. Wow. So that's the power of the gospel. Yeah, that's the power of what the Bible teaches. Right. Now, again, some of your viewers, they may not even have ever read a Bible, and which is okay. But I'm not judging anybody. Right. I just know what my eyeballs have seen, and I know the power of what the message of Jesus Christ can do to people's lives.
Do you feel that it was worth it when you see those stories, when you hear those stories?
Yes. Oh my God.
What you had to go through was worth it?
Yes. Yeah.
Everything because of the impact that you had to play on the world stage called Christian television.
Without question. In fact, that's really, I think the stories I hear are probably less than 0.1% of all the stories that exist. Right. But I do believe it does make it worth it. And that's what people don't understand. We talked about to whom much is given, much is required, but it's lonely at the top of the mountain. My parents were criticized, they were ostracized. My mom had pink hair, all of this garbage. But, they had pretty thick skin, and they realized, that we're doing this not for ourselves. They were never wanting to be movie stars or rich or famous or any of that. That's what the world wants to sell you. They really did want to touch and affect people's lives. Now, did they lose their way? Did they make mistakes? Absolutely. Right. Everybody does. But it does make it worth it, because people don't understand the sacrifice. Mm-hmm. If you would have seen many times my mother laying on a couch, I literally saw her weeping tears that were red, that were like drops of blood, almost like in the Bible, when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was sweating like great drops of blood. They were weeping. They literally, felt like at times they were going to die because the burden was too heavy. And then somebody would lift them, and they'd hear a story, or some little girl would come up and say, hey, my daughter was choking, and we prayed, and you prayed with us on our prayer lines, and she's fine now. Stories like that have changed lives of people that have healed or touched. It does help. It makes it worth it. Do you think, I have 3 questions, and we'll wrap this up. I just have 3 important questions. I don't know if they're important, but I'm still going to ask. Being a father, being a grandfather, are you able to sympathize with why your parents took the stance that they did, or are you like me, or because I'm the type of person, I don't think there's anything that I would not defend my daughter for. So that's a tricky question. It is a tricky question, and I'm playing devil's advocate. No, I appreciate it, and it's a good question, and it's a fair question. The answer is yes and no. I would never in a million years, I don't care if I was the president of a nation, I would not put my son or daughter or kids through what my dad. He was protecting. What he was protecting was not only the empire of TBN, he was protecting his identity. His identity was strictly, before TBN, he was just a business guy that worked. They used to sell Corona Clipper pruners. That was part of their business. Snippers. When TBN grew and it obviously became an empire, that was my dad's identity. And so, he was protecting that. He literally thought TBN was going to be the vehicle that was going to reap the final harvest, meaning so many people were going to get saved watching TBN. And if you're into the rapture and eschatology and all of that, when X amount of people get saved, it triggers the rapture. And now again, these non-believers are going to think we're insane. Like smoking crack. Yeah, we are absolutely on crack. But, but the Muslims believe the same thing. They think Muhammad's going to return and, all of this stuff. The Jews believe in the Messiah will return. Now, we believe the Messiah is Christ. So the Muslims are they're on their own. But, but he was protecting the empire. He was protecting his identity. And at times I sort of understand it, but I really, it's really hard. Yeah, I'm with you. Super hard. That's that. I cannot see ever betraying my daughter. Yeah. I literally go through scenarios, money, fame, house, you go through all these things and you try to figure out, well, could I do that? And I don't get it. Well, and part of it, my dad in his later years, again, he was dealing with alcoholism. His mind was not right. To be fair, and listen. If you want to dispute me on that, I'll give you 100 witnesses that saw my father dealing with alcoholism. So his mind was not right, and my brother was lying against me, telling him things that I was going to do, people I was going to marry. There was a pastor I was going to marry, and they were going to take over TBN.
Right, hostile takeover.
Oh my God, the garbage I heard coming from that camp.
Right.
And so I understand it, but I don't understand it. But again, I forgive.
Laurie, obviously she's on Matt's side, that's her husband, but did she even remotely try to be a confidant or?
Yeah, she was trying to be a peacekeeper.
Okay.
A little bit. I think, I don't know. I don't think Laurie is completely informed.
Right.
Into all of, she's
informed now.
Yeah, she's on a need to know basis, and a lot of this stuff she didn't need to know.
Right.
And I think she's going to be still absolutely shocked when she reads the book or what the questions they asked my 13-year-old daughter that she approved.
That's crazy.
Now, she didn't know she approved them, but if you're on the board, you take the accolades and you take the arrows.
Right.
If you're on the board of directors, you don't get to choose.
Right.
And I can't imagine, they've got 2 kids, Kaylin and Cody. I can't even fathom putting those 2 boys through the questioning of their sexuality, of, this and that, based on the fact that if either one of their boys had been molested by a TBN employee, I would have been an advocate for him. We would have fired the employee. We would have prosecuted the employee. He would have gone to jail. We'd have called the police.
Right.
I don't care about the PR hit. I want to protect those boys.
Right. Absolutely.
And that's what I don't think she understands, the gravity of what happened. She's enjoying the lifestyle. She's enjoying the private jet. She's enjoying the TV show. But brother, to whom much is given, much is required.
Come on.
And I don't think they've paid the final price.
Oh, it's not over.
It's not over.
It's not over. One final question. Where do you see Christian television going? Because it feels like, well, there's 2 things. You have technology. So obviously technology is going to make it where you really don't need a TBN. You don't really need a Daystar, because everybody can kind of do their thing like I'm doing and just kind of create their own lane. But also from a culturally, do you think Christian television or Christianism is even effective anymore? I mean, you look at the Hillsong documentary, we were talking about that.
Right.
And that's a big impact. I mean, Hillsong, you don't get much bigger than TBN or Hillsong.
Well, they were both very similar. They were talking about some of the revenue models in that documentary. And TBN and Hillsong were very similar in size. TBN, was about in my day when I was there, we were doing $200 million a year in revenue. Half donation, half sale of airtime.
Right.
Hillsong was in that similar. By the time they got all the licensing fees and the offerings, they were a big ministry. Music, all of that. First of all, I absolutely think Christian television is relevant. I think it can reach people. I think like you said, it's broken up into lanes now with technology. We had to be all things in the 70s. We were in some cities, there were only 6 TV stations, and TBN was one of them.
Right.
When we went, I think, to Tulsa, it was ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, Independent, and TBN.
Right.
And so...
And maybe sometimes PBS.
Maybe, yeah.
Maybe.
Not in all cities.
Not in all cities.
So you were going to watch TBN at some point.
Right.
So they... there was an absolute relevance to it, but we had to be kind of cover all the bases. We had to take what I called a shotgun approach.
Right.
We had Catholic programming.
Right.
One of our favorite shows, I used to talk to this guy, was a Catholic priest, Father Michael Manning. We had deaf programming with sign language. We had Spanish programming.
Smile of a Child. Kids
programming.
JCTV.
And then denominationally and theologically, we had to cover the spectrum, from John MacArthur down to Benny Hinn.
Right.
So we had uber charismatic stuff, which the Baptists were fascinated watching the charismatics.
Right.
And, here, the issue, I think, and I've had this debate, there were a lot of really good Bible teachers, just basic Bible teachers. They were just super boring.
Right.
And, who wants to watch? Now, John MacArthur, I don't want to get into that. He's a great Bible scholar,
Right.
But he's boring.
Right. Trust me, I thought TBN was boring.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'll tell you a funny story too in a minute. But the more charismatic programs like Benny or T.D. Jakes or the guys that preach hellfire and brimstone, the guys that pace like lions, that made better TV.
Yeah, Parsley.
Parsley, Dwight Thompson, Creflo Dollar, all of those guys.
Right.
So that's why I think a lot of television skewed more charismatic. Look at, you had Jim Baker, he was an AG boy.
Yeah.
Pat Robertson spoke in tongues and, talk about healing on the air.
Right.
And the Baptists, they were fascinated with it and they would watch, but some of them would then just light you on fire, if they could.
Right.
The worst attack on TBN in 45 years was not the LA Times, it was John MacArthur.
Right.
He wrote an article that just filleted my parents wide open, likened them to Tetchell, selling indulgences.
Right.
So there was never a dull moment, obviously, dealing in that arena, and I don't regret it. I do regret, the way the family split and this and that. But like I said, when that door closed, multiple doors opened. But I'll tell you a quick story. There was a kid we hired. Did you watch TBN as a little boy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this guy was
Real Videos was the show we watched on Saturday nights. That was our MTV.
Yeah, exactly. It was at least sort of cool.
It was kind of cool.
And Matt had his mullet.
Yeah, the mullet.
All that stuff. He was trying to be cool. But we hired a kid to be our photographer. He'd grown up on TBN. He was like in the Midwest, like in Missouri. And he flew in, we interviewed him, we hired him as the photographer, and I'm talking to him. I said, congratulations, you're going to have fun. He goes, I'm not quite sure how I feel about working here now. And I said, dude, what are you talking about? We just went through the interview. He said, well, as a little boy, I grew up on TBN, but he said, what would happen if I'd ever lie or steal or do something bad? My mom would make me sit in front of the TV.
Oh, man.
Like lying was 1 hour of TBN time.
God.
Stealing was 2 hours of TBN time.
That's insane.
So she thought that the TBN, was going to zap the devil out of this kid or something.
That's hilarious.
So he had to sit and stare. It was like, you didn't put her in a corner like a timeout.
Right.
He had to watch TBN only when he was punished.
Right.
If he was good, his mind was totally messed up and twisted, but it was kind of a cute story.
Right.
But I do think, to answer your question, I do think Christian television is relevant. Like you said, if I want Joyce Meyer now, I don't have to go to TBN or Daystar.
Right.
I just go to Joyce Meyer.
Right.
The internet has changed everything, just like it changed the taxi industry with Uber, changed the hotel industry with Airbnb.
Right.
I can watch what I want to watch. Your generation grew up on watch what you want to watch, when you want to watch it, where you want to watch it.
Right.
And that's a convenience that's awesome. But, with that, is technological challenges, as you know. And I went through the standard definition. When I was in TV, the picture was square, 4:3. Now it's HD. Now we're going 4K. Now we're going 8K. So all of these challenges are in front of us. But good Holy Spirit inspired programming and content that will touch people's lives is my focus.
It's been a pleasure, Mr. Crouch.
Thank you,
I
brother.
can't even tell you how blessed I am to be in front of you. You have been an inspiration to me, my family. I'm actually doing film and television because of the seeds that you guys planted. I don't think I would have been as focused on it if it wasn't for TBN, if it wasn't for what you... And I actually liked you. You were my favorite because it felt like you weren't so... You didn't seem fake to me.
Yeah.
You always came off like you knew what you were talking about. You knew the tech stuff, which I was so into, the tech stuff. And it was always a truthfulness and honesty in your eyes. And I'll be honest, I always saw your father and your mom as just kind of like celebrity, almost like puppets, you know?
Right.
It's kind of like
Right.
they're just there and they do their thing, but it wasn't relatable.
Right.
Matt was always cool with the real videos. I used to love that show, but I just never connected to Matt like I did Laurie. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, she's a lot cuter.
But no, it's just I just wanted to say thank you on camera, because I think that so many of us are doing what we're doing because of what you did and the sacrifices you made.
Well, thank you. And again, you know, like I said, touching and affecting people's lives,
Right.
you know, and it's beyond just getting people saved.
Right.
I think there's, like you said, an inspirational part of it, a career path that was obviously paved for you. And I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, keep going.
Right.
You know, they say there's more content being created in one day today than 20 years ago was created in a year.
Wow.
So it's a new world. It's a brave new world. And, you know, I just encourage, you know, everybody to, you know, think beyond themselves. I want to stand for biblical values.
Right.
And, you know, the media, in my opinion, definitely has, you know, a left-leaning slant. It's got, you know, listen, I have no issue loving and adopting everybody.
Right.
Tammy Faye Baker, who we talked about her movie, The Eyes of Tammy Faye, which is, again, a good movie. I would encourage people to see it. Now, some of it's garbage,
right.
You know, but it's 80-90% true. Her stance on the gay community was the most amazing I've ever seen. Listen, she said, I can agree to disagree with your lifestyle, but that doesn't mean I don't have to love you.
Right.
And it was like the gay community loved Tammy.
Oh, yeah,
they loved her to the day she died.
Absolutely.
Now, half of those guys wanted to be her.
Right.
But, you know, she said, I love you. And that's our job as Christians.
Absolutely.
To not love, you know, conditionally. I don't care what people do. I love their heart. I want them to know the Lord.
Absolutely.
You know, we're all broken. We all have issues. We all have, you know, different lifestyles, different cultural backgrounds. Your skin's a different color than my skin. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely.
Dude, love is what it's all about. And I learned that from Tammy probably better than anybody. But the media is important. The media is viable. And I want to do everything in my power to create good, you know, wholesome content that affects people's lives.
When is your book coming out?
That's a good question. I've been offered 6 figures to write a book, believe it or not.
I believe it.
And they offered it,
I believe it.
back, you know, a few years ago when I actually could have used the money.
Right.
The problem is they wanted it to be all salacious, all kiss and tell, you know, all of this garbage. The story of TBN would make Hillsong pale in some of the garbage that went on, some of the drama that went on. But I want people to realize that God will use broken vessels. That my parents weren't perfect. I'm not perfect. My brother's not perfect. But God will use us anyway.
Right.
And, you know, and that is a lesson, I think. Now, that's not an excuse saying, well, you can just go live however you want to live. And God will bless you.
Right.
I don't believe that either. I think there's a balance in there.
It is a balance.
But I just know, you know, when you glimpse behind the veil, you will see imperfection. And that's the sad part. It's not the fairy tale. If you've ever, I used to shoot commercials for Disneyland. And so, you know, I'd be out in the castle with the Mickey and, you know, Minnie and Goofy, and we're shooting these great commercials. And then I'd go backstage with them. They'd pull their heads off and Goofy'd start smoking, you know. And I'm like, oh, man, you know, that's not right.
Right, exactly.
So I actually, you can cut this, but I actually shot a commercial with Goofy. We put him on a roller coaster. And he's sitting on this roller coaster, and we had these little actor kids around him, and we sent the roller coaster, and we said to the kids, just all look happy and, wave your hands and have fun. And Goofy's in the front seat. We lock the camera to the roller coaster. We roll. About halfway through, I'm looking at Goofy on the other side of the roller coaster, and his head's going up, his head's going down. He's going over. He hit this little kid. And he comes into the station, and he's literally slumped back like that.
That's funny.
And he goes, dude, I threw up in my head.
Oh,
He'd gotten sick on that roller coaster.
Oh, wow.
And he had vomited in his head. And
Man. Oh, yeah.
And so we pulled him off, and we had to pull his head off.
Oh, man.
And he had thrown up. He was so
man.
sad, so upset. But that's kind of like the glimpse behind the veil.
Right, absolutely.
It's
That's
kind of
funny.
sad, but we got him cleaned up and we finished the shoot. But God will use each and every one of us if we are obedient. And obedience is the key, I think, to all of it.
Now, just so that we're clear, the opinions, views of Paul Crouch Jr. or the Crouch family is not necessarily the views of CJC Network or the Carl Jackson Podcast or myself. My job is to let my guests speak and tell their truth. So in no way are we trying to hurt anyone's reputation. That has never been our intent, and it never will be our intent. And I think Paul Crouch Jr. told his truth today. And it's important that we allow people to tell their truth. For some reason, we're in this bubble where you can't say anything, you can't tell a joke, you offend someone. If you say something the wrong way, it's slander. No one can tell their story. No one is supposed to tell their story. And I don't believe in that. I believe that I'm supposed to allow people to speak. And that's what we did in this interview. And everything that is brought up today is alleged. And I have to say that for legal reasons.